Tuesday, June 7th, 2005. Two young boys sat on a dumpster in a narrow alleyway. An air conditioning unit above them hummed, conveniently absorbing any noises emitted by the slightest shift of the body. Most of the lights were broken or burnt out, leaving only vague silhouettes to be outlined by moonlight. They both wore ragged, dirty clothes, which were probably second-hand items acquired from a charity. The older boy flicked out his arm and brought his wristwatch to his face. After checking the time, he let his arm rest in his lap and spoke in a hushed tone to the younger boy. "Almost 11 o'clock, Quincy." The broken silence startled Quincy, causing him to jolt in his seat.
What do you want me to do, Garrett?"
he replied sheepishly. Garrett Cosma smiled at his younger brother. The smile was a small attempt to mask the worry he had over bringing an 11-year-old boy to gather information on the streets of Chicago. Garrett himself was only 12 when he was first ordered to be a scout for the Shadow Lords of Chicago, and he had to do it alone, learning the best practices without any guidance. Now at the age of 16, Garrett could already be considered a veteran, and it was one small grace that Quincy would be able to draw upon the experience of his older brother. Garrett placed one hand on Quincy's shoulder. "You're going to stay in the alley and watch from the shadows. Hide, don't make a sound, and take note of who goes in and out of that building." He pointed across the street to direct Quincy to a small brick structure that was sandwiched in between two tall, dilapidated apartment buildings. The small building had large letters lining the fascia that spelled out dry cleaners. A single large window had the name of the business, Johnson's Cleaners, spelled out by stickers. Stale fluorescent light poured from the building onto the pavement outside, highlighting broken glass and other debris that littered the ground as a result of urban decay. Inside, there was a countertop with a cash register. Behind the counter was an automated monorail system filled with a variety of plastic-covered garments on hangers. To the left of the rail system was a door that presumably led to the back area of the business. There were two disheveled men, probably drug addicts, standing in front of the business, chatting away about something. Garrett tugged on Quincy's shoulder to regain his full attention. "Remember every detail you can. What they look like, what they're wearing, and if they do anything that looks suspicious. It all can be important." After Garrett finished speaking, Quincy nervously replied,
"Where will you be?"
Garrett pointed back at the laundromat. "I'll be over by that building trying to listen to what they say." He then hopped off the dumpster. "Come on, they'll be here any minute, and we need to get some info from Marcel." Marcel Garrett was the guru that visited the Cosma household once a week to listen to what Garrett, and soon Quincy, had observed or overheard. If the info was good, Marcel would nod, give a new assignment, and leave. If Garrett had nothing, or if it didn't meet Marcel's expectations, he got beat. Garrett also received a beating when he protested Marcel's order to bring Quincy along. As he laid on the floor, pinching his bloody nose, Garrett towered above him and bellowed, "He will learn to make himself useful, just like you have. This work is the only hope your pitiful family has to be worth something." Garrett now looked at his brother, who still sat on the alley dumpster, dazed and staring at the ground. His brother now shared his fate, and he had to protect him. Though in order to do that, he had to get him moving. Garrett began to walk towards the alley entrance and spoke with urgency in his voice. "Quincy, let's go!" The harsher tone jolted Quincy into action. He quickly hopped off the dumpster and ran to catch up to Garrett's side. Garrett guided him towards the threshold of the alley, eventually stopping at a mass gathering of boxes, trash cans, and other discarded miscellanea. Garrett knew it would provide adequate cover for a boy of Quincy's size, as he had hid behind similar piles when he was smaller. He crouched behind the pile and motioned for Quincy to join him. "This is a great spot. You can stay completely hidden and still watch what's going on," said Garrett, as he pointed to an opening in between the stacked boxes that provided a view of the dry cleaners. Quincy stared at the opening with vacant eyes. His thoughts were clearly elsewhere. Quincy wasn't prepared for this life. Garrett briefed him on the situation hours before, and once again while they were sitting on the dumpster, but another reminder couldn't hurt. Garrett lightly patted Quincy on the cheek to gain his attention, and began to repeat everything they went over earlier. "We're expecting at least one leech to show up. I've been watching him for weeks now, and he just started coming here this past month. He's got a bald head with full sleeve tattoos on each arm. Every night, he shows up in a black car around 11 o'clock with a few buddies. They walk into the building with a bunch of suitcases and then leave with the same ones. They get into the car and drive away. Quincy nodded his head with each bullet point made. Whether it finally sunk in or not likely wouldn't be known until it was too late. There was one point Garrett couldn't let fall through the cracks, though. He grabbed each of Quincy's shoulders and gave him a shake. Garrett's eyes locked onto Quincy's with a cold intensity as he spoke. Listen, vampires are dangerous, Quincy. I've seen ones that are super fast, like the Flash. The one that I know will be here tonight is really strong. I saw him completely cave a guy's head in with one punch. Quincy's eyes widened. Garrett watched him intently, looking for signs that his words were taking hold. Tears welled up in Quincy's eyes, and his body began to tremble.
I'm scared, Garrett.
I know. I was too when I first started. I still am. All you're going to do is sit still and watch. Just don't make any noise, and they won't even know you're there. Quincy was still shaking, and he began to sniffle. Garrett let out an exasperated sigh and briefly looked to the ground before meeting Quincy's eyes once more. Listen, if you think something bad is going to happen, just run. I don't think he's one of the fast ones, so you should be able to get away. Just take the back alleys and keep running until you feel safe. We'll meet back up at home. Quincy sniffled a final time and gave a hesitant nod, a gesture that told Garrett this was as ready as he'd ever be tonight. Garrett stood up and gave Quincy a gentle pat on his shoulder with one hand and a thumbs up with the other. Garrett walked away and headed across the street. His eyes never moved away from Quincy until his line of sight became obstructed by the garbage pile that would protect his brother. I can't see him, but neither can they. Garrett stealthily made his way across the street, heading for the right side alley between the dry cleaners and an apartment building. He carefully maneuvered in the shadows and stayed behind parked vehicles when able. He was now close enough that he could hear the two men talking about their next score, confirming his original suspicions. Drug addicts. I was right. Garrett easily avoided detection by the druggies and made it to his hiding spot in the alley, another pile of garbage cans and debris. It wasn't even a minute later that he began to hear the unmistakable sound of car wheels rolling on asphalt. Garrett had correctly predicted they would arrive from the north, like before, and he hid in his spot on the south side of the building. He normally would have been in a position well in advance of the car's arrival, but dealing with Quincy had taken too much time. Garrett peeked through the opening of his pile and had a clear view of Quincy's hiding spot. Garrett watched it until the black car they were waiting for parked in front of the dry cleaners and obscured his view of the alley across the street. He's hidden. Don't worry about him, just do your job. The driver and passenger side doors opened. The driver was the now familiar, bald-headed vampire. He wore a black sports coat, which covered up his signature sleeve tattoos. The new suit was a departure from his normal attire of jeans and some variety of t-shirt. Someone's been making a little extra money. The passenger was another familiar face, but his true nature was not clear like the bald-headed driver who could kill a man with a single bare-fisted punch. His outfit was not very different from the driver, but the passenger had worn classy outfits every other time Garrett had seen him. The passenger held a black briefcase in his right hand and glanced around the street, presumably surveying his surroundings. The driver made his way around the vehicle and onto the sidewalk. A view of his full body revealed that he too carried a black briefcase. They began to walk towards the dry cleaner's entrance, but then stopped as the two drug addicts entered into Garrett's field of vision. The passenger held up his left hand, palm out, to stop them. The addicts halted and held out their own hands towards the driver to beg, and one of them spoke.
Hey, Larry, you guys got the latest there? Can I see?
Larry, a name at last. Larry cracked a smile and spoke.
Easy there, fellas. We just gotta hash some stuff out first, then we'll sell you all you can handle.
The second addict then took a step in front of his companion to beg for himself.
But please, Larry, we're hurting bad. Just let us have a cent.
The first addict lashed an arm out towards the briefcase in the passenger's hand before the second one could finish speaking. The passenger quickly recoiled back to avoid the attempted theft while Larry darted in between them and thrusted a single palm towards the offending addict. Garrett was not surprised when the palm strike from a vampire with super strength caused the malnourished man to fly outside the field of vision his hiding spot provided. He was not surprised by the sound of shattered glass coming from the laundry cleaner's entrance, nor the sickening thud from inside shortly after. He was also not surprised to see the remaining addict, evidently the smarter one, holding his hands up in surrender and uttering an endless loop of, "Oh my God, please don't kill me," in an attempt to beg for his life. What came as a surprise to everyone at the scene, however, was the cacophonous sound of clanking and rattling that came from across the street. Larry and the passenger turned to face the direction of the disturbance, while the addict, who had now fallen to his knees, still pleaded for his life.
Quincy, no, goddammit.
The passenger turned back to face the addict, backhanded him across the face and calmly said, "Shut up," then turned back to face the alley across the street, while the addict obeyed and looked to the ground. Larry began walking slowly in the direction where Quincy was hiding, with his head cocked to one side, suspiciously watching the area. Garrett's whole body tensed with anxiety, under the realization that his brother would most likely die if he didn't do something. His eyes darted from the scene unfolding before him, and then to the trash littered in the alley in which he hid. His attention quickly gravitated towards a nearby brick that appeared to have fallen off the nearby apartment building. Garrett picked up the brick, stood up from his barricade, and hurled the brick as hard as he could at Larry's car. The brick seemed to fly through the air in slow motion, as Garrett realized he had just traded his own life for Quincy's if he was spotted. He began to quickly duck behind his hiding spot, hoping he would be fast enough to become unseen before the brick made contact.
Shit.
The sound of shattered glass once again rung through the alley while Garrett tucked himself into a ball behind his makeshift sanctuary. The next sound was Larry screaming,
What the fuck? What the fuck did you do?
Loud and angry footsteps crunched the gravel of the street as Garrett curled himself further into a fetal position with his head resting on his knees, unwilling to see if Larry was headed straight for him. The footsteps grew closer, and Garrett's anxiety grew with each footfall.
You wrecked my ride. I'm going to fucking kill you.
He heard Larry say, full of fury and becoming more unintelligible with each word. The footfalls came quicker, and Garrett began to shake.
Please get out of there, Quincy. Please don't watch this.
The remaining addict began to scream.
No, it wasn't me!
The next thing Garrett heard were bestial snarls that must have come from Larry, followed by the sounds of snapping, tearing, and shrieks of pain. The screaming stopped and was replaced by something that sounded like wet towels being slapped on a countertop. Eventually, the disgusting noises ceased, leaving only the sound of a low growl. Then Garrett heard the voice of the passenger, still calm despite the cacophony. "We don't have time for a cleanup. This place is blown. Let's go."
Mother. Fucker. My car,
said Larry, who still sounded like he was more animal than man. "It's just a broken window, you imbecile. We'll get it fixed, but we have to go now," replied the passenger. Garrett heard the sounds of feet stepping into rain puddles, then the sound of car doors, followed by an engine starting. Garrett didn't unravel himself from the fetal position until he heard the car begin to drive off. He didn't stand until he could no longer hear its wheels on the asphalt. Garrett still shook as he turned around and walked onto the sidewalk. The area in front of the dry cleaners was a scene of carnage. The addict that was smart enough to not provoke the vampire in the first place now laid in pieces. Limbs, loose bits of skin, and viscera mingled with the broken glass in pools of blood. Garrett felt nauseous, but avoided becoming ill when his mind snapped back to his brother.
Please don't be there, Quincy.
Garrett ran across the street and began to hear voices coming from the buildings. It wouldn't be long before someone found the horror show and called the authorities. He ran towards Quincy's hiding spot and saw that the stacked boxes and trash cans had been knocked over. Quincy wasn't there.
Good. Now where are you?
Garrett ran down the alley, searching every nook and cranny in search of his brother, but he was nowhere to be found.
Did you go home like I told you to?
Garrett continued running through the back alleys, block by block, backtracking the same path he used to get to the stakeout area. Quincy was still nowhere to be found along the way, and Garrett, still pumped full of adrenaline, grew more anxious as he got closer to home.
Please be there.
Eventually, Garrett arrived back in the familiar surroundings of his neighborhood. Several worn-down 3-story apartment buildings formed a square around a central courtyard, with walkways that cut through areas of dirt with the occasional patch of dead grass. Garrett rushed to Building 4, where his family lived, and threw open the busted door to their apartment on the first floor. He frantically searched every room, all while calling out Quincy's name. Quincy wasn't there, nor were his parents, who must have been elsewhere on assignment. Garrett ran his hands through his hair and growled in frustration.
Damn it. Where are you?
Garrett ran out of the apartment and exited the building through the back to face a basketball court, the last place he could think of to look for Quincy. The lights that should have illuminated the court for night play had been burnt out for years, and the court itself was cracked with worn-out paint lines. Peering through the chain-link fence that surrounded the court, Garrett could make out a vague outline of a silhouette huddled into one of the corners. He made his way around the fence to the latch door and began to hear soft sniffling coming from the sitting figure.
Oh, thank God.
Garrett now walked, having all the anxiety washed away by Quincy's familiar sobs. Quincy sat clutching a basketball that was barely inflated from the years of abuse the neighborhood had inflicted on it. He lifted his head up, revealing tear streaks that glistened in the moonlight as Garrett drew near. Garrett crouched next to him and spoke in a hushed tone.
How you doing, Quincy? I'm sorry, I got scared. So did I.
Garrett placed a hand on Quincy's shoulder and smiled before speaking.
I know. You did exactly what I told you to do. You ran home. You did good. But I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything,
said Quincy as his voice began to crack.
Is Marcel going to hurt me?
No.
No, Quincy. You're going to be fine. You heard the vampire's name, right? It's Larry. Marcel always considers new names good info. Quincy's posture relaxed, but the sniffles continued. Garrett gave Quincy's shoulder a squeeze and stood up. Come on. Marcel will be here in a couple of hours, and we've still got your math homework to do. Garrett extended a hand for Quincy and helped him stand up. As they walked back towards their home, Garrett realized he had made a mistake. He had panicked. He panicked from the fear of being killed. He panicked from the grotesque sight of the torn-up body. He panicked with worry about Quincy. He only had one piece of info for Marcel because he had panicked and neglected to check out the dry cleaners once the vampire and his friend left.
It's okay.
However, what Garrett felt now was not panic, but calm. He had given the one good piece of information he had and ensured his brother's safety. Quincy would be fine, but for Garrett, the night would end in pain.
But that's okay.